Let's compare some footage taken between the Mavic Air and the Mavic Pro. So both drones were set in UHD, the color was D-Cine-like, the style was standard. Both were in manual exposure mode, both were set at ISO 100, shutter was at 1/160th, and the white balance on auto. This is just so that we can get a baseline comparison to compare the two images with, so they're both roughly the same. We're also going to fly the drones in the exact same place at the exact same time, almost side by side next to each other. So this is the image from the Mavic Pro, and as you can see, it sort of leans a little bit on the cooler side, more towards a little bit of a push towards green, and you can see the problems with the compression in terms of the lack of detail that it's showing there, mainly due to the compression of the image. Now if we switch to the Mavic Air, you can see it's a lot more warm. The actual image shifts towards magenta, but you can see it's resolving a lot more detail, mainly due to the better compression being used and the newer sensor and processor. So you can see the difference between the two there. So again, if we do a side-by-side, fairly evident differences between the two here. You can see the difference in the color tone being used, and you can also see that the Mavic Air is showing a lot more detail, finite detail, whereas the Mavic Pro image tends to look a little bit sort of flatter and more washed out when both drones are being used in the same settings. Again, here's the Mavic Pro again. So we're just having a look to see sort of the amount of detail and if the compression issues are rearing their ugly head. And you can see, a lot of the finite details sort of get mushed together with the Mavic Pro. Doesn't sort of resolve as much detail due to the high compression being used when recording in UHD. That 60 megabits per second codec is really sort of struggling. So if we switch back over now to the Mavic Air, and you can sort of see the detail, particularly in fine detail over there on the grass and in the trees. It's the compression is helping rather than hindering the drone, which is what happens with the Mavic Pro. So definite advantage to the Mavic Air here compared to the Mavic Pro. Again, we'll just do a side-by-side comparison between the two so you can really sort of see the difference in terms of the two different images. I mean, I mentioned earlier before the difference in the color tones between the two, but it's quite evident that the Mavic Air image looks a lot more detailed and not sort of as flat, and I think the Mavic Pro sort of lacks a lot of detail in images, which is not so bad when you're up high, but when you're passing close by over things, it becomes a lot more evident. So here's those two same shots again, blown up 200%. I would never actually do this with real drone footage that I take, but it's just a good example for you guys to see exactly sort of the difference between the two images in terms of the the different processing that's going on, and the better higher bitrate codec that is being used by the Mavic Air makes a big difference in terms of the detail that can be seen in these two images. Here's just another comparison between the two drones at a higher altitude this time here, which it should help out the Mavic Pro a little bit better than the Mavic Air. So here's the Mavic Air shot. So we're just looking at the detail in the image and compression artifacts, and you can see the flickering in all these shots, which is very synonymous with most drone footage in terms of the codec not being able to keep up with the amount of information that's required in shots like this. Particularly when you're moving, that flickering is very evident. You just see the Mavic Air the Mavic Pro just passed below the Mavic Air just on that shot here, and here's the Mavic Pro, and again, it looks really sort of soft. It doesn't sort of matter what you do with the Mavic Pro. You're not getting that sort of finite detail being resolved very well inside that image. Again, just as a comparison, here's a side by side, so you can see both drones at the same time and see the difference between the two images. And it's fairly evident that you can see the difference in the, if you have a look over in the trees on the right-hand side on that riverbank, you can see that they're being resolved with a lot more detail because of the better compression, etc. over the Mavic Pro, where you have a look at the branches all seem to almost mold together with the Mavic Pro vision when you compare it against the Mavic Air. As far as dynamic range and highlight handling go, they're very, very similar. Not a huge difference between the two of them. Again, here's just a quick, very basic grade that I did in 30-40 seconds to the Mavic Air vision, just to try and bring it more in line in terms of changing the colours up a little bit and adding a bit of contrast to the image. Being able to take a bit of that magenta out of it and to sort of correct up the image to look a little bit more presentable than what it is out of the box when shooting in that D-Cine-like profile. And here's the Mavic Pro, which obviously benefits from having a bit of adjustment work done to it. In terms of color-wise, it cleans up and looks a little bit more similar to the Mavic Air in terms of the color tones and things. It can be made to look very similar, but you really do notice the difference in terms of the image being resolved here due to that compression, the higher compression that's being used for the Mavic Pro's UHD images. So it was just a hovering shot where we put the Mavic Pro and the Mavic Air next to each other, and we're just shooting Taro here, who's taking some photos. And this is just to really have a look at the difference in terms of, the resolving power of both of these different drones and the color palette of them. You can see there's not a lot of detail in Taro's skin there. It looks very sort of almost painted to a certain extent. It's not resolving a lot of detail. That's probably mainly due to the compression again, as I said. It's not as crisp an image as what you get from the Mavic Air, for instance. And you see it's definitely got a sort of a little bit of a turn towards the colder side of the palette in terms of colours. A little bit sort of a push towards the green, which is sort of a little bit evident. You can see in the rocks and things there. But again, not a lot of detail in anything. Everything sort of looks almost washed out, and can't see much texture in anything in this particular image. Okay, now if we switch to the Mavic Air, this is the exact same shot as before, and you can see it's resolving a lot more detail. Everything doesn't look sort of painted. Even if you have a look at Taro's jeans and you have a look at his skin and his jacket, you can see a lot more texture. It doesn't look like it's like a painted image. You can see the actual different differentiations in colors and tones and textures, which is, I think, where the Mavic Air has quite a big advantage over the Mavic Pro. Color-wise on this shot, you can see even in the D-Cine-like, it seems to have a little bit more saturation and a little bit more contrast than what you get shooting in the same settings on the Mavic Pro. And just as a real comparison to see the difference between the two images, it becomes a lot more evident here when you do a side-by-side showing both of them. You can see the difference. The skin tones look a lot more accurate for a start. The colours look more accurate on the Mavic Air. And you can see the difference in terms of the detail that's being resolved, not only on Taro's face and his jacket, but also on the, looking at the background there. The Mavic Pro, it's not resolving all that detail in the background, which you can see is clearly more evident with the Mavic Air. So the Mavic Air has a big advantage in terms of there, but you can also see the difference in terms of the contrast and the saturation, which is a lot more evident. And but what you can see too is that Taro's jacket is a more accurate color. That's sort of the color of his jacket. Whereas on the Mavic Pro, the color doesn't quite look right. It's a little bit more skewed towards blue, where it's actually a brown colored jacket. Now, just finally, one more example coming up. I've just cropped in here 200% on this image. Again, it's something I would never do on a drone, but it's just so you can clearly see the difference in terms of, the detail and the resolving power of the difference between these two different drones. You can see on the Mavic Pro, look, it still looks quite soft on Taro's face there, and you can see there's no real texture. There's no texture to his skin. There's no texture on his jacket. It looks very flat, and this is mainly probably due to the compression. Again, that high compression that's being used on the Mavic Pro, it's not doing that drone any favors at all. So here's the exact same shot on the Mavic Air, again blown up 200%, and you can see the difference, straight away in terms of the amount of resolving detail that the Mavic Air is capable of. And you can see there's actual texture in his skin, on his jacket. It's not just a one-dimensional sort of color and looking really flat. There's actual sort of texture and detail in the image, and that's the big difference between both of these drones. And again, just to emphasize the point, here's a 200% crop in, but here's a side-by-side, so you can clearly see the difference between the two. It becomes very evident when you do a test like this in terms of, what the codec and the compression differences are between these two drones. I mean, the Mavic Air is obviously using a better processor and a newer sensor, but the compression is really helping out the Mavic Pro. The Mavic Air. The Mavic Pro is really suffering from that, and it's quite evident when you look at the two different pictures here with that. So there you go. There's just a couple of tests for you to see.